The camera pans over an old, weathered farmhouse nestled at the edge of a dark forest. The wind howls through the trees, and the sound of footsteps echoes through the empty halls. Emma's trembling hands clutch a leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed and fragile. A voice whispers, barely audible, "They won't leave me. They never leave." Her breath catches in her throat as she looks up, eyes wide with fear. Outside, a shadow moves in the window, too slow, too unnatural. She turns to Jack, but he's not himself anymore. Something is taking him. And now, it's coming for her too. The screen cuts to black, with only the sound of a distant howl. A final whisper. The hollow is hungry. The drive had been long. Endless stretches of highway. The sky heavy with clouds threatening rain. Emma gazed out the passenger window of the battered SUV. The landscape blurring into a sea of green and brown. The town of Black Hollow was miles away, forgotten on the map, yet the farmhouse they were heading felt like it belonged to another time. She ran her fingers through her hair, fighting the exhaustion pulling at her bones. Jack, her fiancé, had been excited for this escape from their hectic lives in the city. A break from work, a break from everything. But Emma was beginning to feel a strange unease in her chest, an itch that wouldn't go away. "So, what do you think?" Jack asked, breaking the silence, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Emma blinked, looking at the house ahead. The farmhouse had isolated on a rise, surrounded by wild overgrown fields and a forest that looked darker than it should have. It had that old-world charm she should have found comforting. The peeling paint, the cracked windows, the wraparound porch sagging beneath the weight of time. It was undeniably picturesque in a haunting way. "I think it looks old," she replied, forcing a smile. Jack laughed, his fingers gripping the steering wheel a little tighter as he pulled up the gravel driveway. "Old is good. It has character, right? Think of it as rustic." Emma nodded but felt a strange pulse of anxiety. The house, the land, it felt like it was holding something back, something ancient and forgotten. She glanced over at Jack, watching his carefree demeanor as he unloaded the car. He hadn't noticed. He never noticed. The wind picked up, rustling through the branches of surrounding trees. It sounded like a low whisper, a quiet murmur just beneath the sound of the tires crunching on the gravel. Emma turned away from the trees and quickly began unloading her things, trying to push the nagging sensation out of her mind. The first thing she noticed when she stepped inside was the smell. It wasn't the musty, mildew scent of a long-abandoned house. No, this was different. It was earthy, like the smell of wet soil after a storm. The air seemed thick, as though the house itself was holding its breath. "Feels fresh in here, huh?" Jack said, his voice cheerful as he set down a duffel bag by the door. Emma didn't answer at first, walking over to the nearest window and pulling the curtain back. The view beyond was nothing but dense forest and a wild stretch of land. There was no sign of life for miles. It felt oddly isolating, like they were cut off from the world entirely. And there was something about the trees, the way they bent and twisted, that made her skin crawl. "I guess," she finally said, her voice quieter than usual. She dropped her bag on the floor and turned back toward the house, attempting to find something that would anchor her to the present moment. Jack was already setting up a makeshift kitchen in the small, dated kitchen area. The cabinets were warped, the counters chipped, and the floors creaked under his weight. He hummed a tune as he moved about, unpacking canned goods and mugs. It was just like Jack to make the best of any situation, even one that felt off. She watched him for a moment, a pang of guilt pressing against her chest. He'd been so excited for this trip, for this new start. She didn't want to worry him, didn't want to admit that something about the house made her uneasy. Emma turned back toward the hallway. There was something there, something she couldn't place. a feeling that the house was not empty. She couldn't explain it, but it was as though the walls were watching her, observing her every movement. She shook her head, trying to shake the thoughts away. "I'm going to look around," she called to Jack, not waiting for a response. She needed space, needed to be away from the oppressive air of the room. She climbed the creaky stairs and wandered down the long, dark hallway. The floorboards groaned under her feet, the house seeming to exhale with each step. The hallway was narrow, lined with framed photographs of people she didn't recognize. The faces stared at her with dull, lifeless eyes, their smiles cold and unsettling. Some of the frames had cracked glass, others were covered in dust. But it wasn't the pictures that caught her attention. It was the door at the very end of the hallway, a door that appeared out of place in this old house. It was a stark, white-painted door that looked newer than the rest of the house, its paint still crisp. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, but something inside her stopped her. A sense of dread gripped her chest. She had no reason to be afraid, but the door felt wrong, as though whatever was behind was not meant to be disturbed. Yet curiosity gnawed at her. What was behind that door? She could feel it calling to her. She shook her head, pulling her hand back. Not now. She wasn't going to explore it today. Instead, she walked back down the hall. But as she passed another door, a low creaking sound came from behind it. Emma froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She slowly turned toward the door. It had come from inside the room. No doubt about it. Someone or something was in there. She stepped closer, her breathing shallow, trying to listen for any other sound. The silence stretched, only broken by the soft whistling of the wind outside. Then the door handle began to turn, slowly, steadily. Emma stepped back, her eyes wide. Her pulse quickened as she stared at the door, waiting for something to happen. But before she could react further, Jack's voice echoed from downstairs. "Hey, Emma, you coming down to help me with dinner?" The door handle stopped moving, and the creaking sound ceased. Emma blinked, her heart pounding in her chest. She swallowed hard, trying to gather herself. The house was old, sure, and the wood was probably shifting with age. There was a logical explanation, wasn't there? But as she turned and hurried back downstairs, her skin tingled with a nagging feeling that she wasn't alone in the house. Jack was in the kitchen, humming again, blissfully unaware of what she'd just experienced. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "Everything okay?" he asked, glancing up. Emma nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just getting used to the house." But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house was already getting used to her. The night crept in faster than Emma had expected. By the time they finished unpacking, the sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving the farmhouse shrouded in shadows. The air outside had grown damp, carrying the earthy scent of the forest, and the wind had picked up, howling through the trees with an unsettling intensity. Emma was in the living room, sitting on the worn sofa, staring at the flickering fire in the stone hearth. The firelight cast long, dancing shadows across the walls, but the warmth didn't reach her. She hugged her arms to her chest, the unease from earlier still lingering, heavy in her chest like a stone. Jack was in the kitchen, finishing up the last of their dinner, a simple pasta dish, but it felt like the last semblance of normalcy in a house that seemed to have forgotten the meaning of it. Emma's eyes drifted to the window, the dark outline of the trees pressing close against the glass. The wind picked up again, causing the branches to sway violently, casting eerie, jagged shadows onto the walls of the room. For a moment, she could have sworn she saw a figure standing just beyond the trees, a faint silhouette, too tall to be a shadow, too still to be real. Her breath caught in her throat, but before she could react, Jack came in, carrying 2 plates. His cheerful expression seemed at odds with the heaviness in the room, and he placed the food down on the coffee table. "Hey, you okay?" Jack asked, his brows furrowed in concern. He sat beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "You're pale. You look like you've seen a ghost." Emma forced a laugh, tried to shake off the cold feeling that had settled over her. "I'm fine, just a little tired." Jack grinned and reached for his plate. "You need to eat, babe. We've got the whole weekend ahead of us. It'll be fun, I promise." Emma nodded, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. She took a bite of the pasta, but her mind kept drifting back to the window. That fleeting figure, she couldn't let it go. The wind howled again, a long, mournful sound that seemed to rattle the windows. She glanced up, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the dark forest. There was something about the sound, something too human in it. It sent a chill down her spine. "Did you hear that?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack paused, fork halfway to his mouth. He looked around, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Hear what?" "That noise outside." Emma's gaze flicked nervously toward the window. It sounded like someone was howling, like a dog, but deeper, more human. Jack chuckled, clearly dismissing her concern. "Probably just an animal. You know, wild stuff out here. You're letting your imagination run wild." Emma nodded, though she wasn't so sure. The sound had been too distinct, too unnatural. But she didn't want to argue with him. Not tonight. He was already in his element, excited to be away from everything. And she didn't want to spoil the moment. So they ate in silence, the tension hanging between them like an invisible weight. Emma tried to focus on her plate, tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in her gut that something was wrong with the house, with the land around it. But every now and then, she would glance toward the window, half expecting to see something or someone staring back at her. As the night wore on, Jack and Emma retired to their bedroom, a small, dusty room with faded wallpaper and a large, old-fashioned bed that creaked under the slightest movement. The room was quiet, save for the occasional gust of wind rattling the windows. "I'll take the first watch," Jack said, as he climbed into bed beside her. "Just want to make sure no animals try to get into the house tonight." Emma nodded absently, already feeling the exhaustion of the day settling in. The fire in the living room had died down to embers, and the house felt even colder now. The wind continued to howl outside, but it was no longer the soothing kind of wind that she remembered from their trips to the coast. This wind felt hungry. It clawed at the house, as if trying to tear it apart. Jack wrapped an arm around her, his warmth a comfort against the cold. "You'll sleep better once you relax," he murmured. "It's just an old house, nothing more." Emma nodded again, though her mind was far from calm. She tried to close her eyes, tried to ignore the sensation of being watched. The room seemed too still, the air too thick. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and writhe, as if they were alive. Sleep, when it finally came, was not peaceful. Underscore, 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 underscore. The first thing Emma noticed when she woke was the silence. It was a deep, suffocating silence. The kind of silence that presses on your ears and makes your heartbeat feel louder than it should be. The wind had stopped. There were no sounds of the forest outside, no distant howls. Only the quiet, the thick, oppressive quiet. Emma turned toward Jack. His side of the bed was empty. Her heart leapt into her throat, and she sat up, her head spinning. "Jack?" she whispered into the stillness. "Jack!" There was no answer. Panic set in as she scrambled out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold floor. She rushed downstairs, calling his name, her voice echoing through the empty house. The kitchen was empty. The living room was empty. She dashed to the front door, but it was locked, just as it had been when they'd gone to bed. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Where the hell was he? She grabbed her phone from the kitchen counter, her hands shaking as she dialed his number. It rang and rang. No answer. Just as she was about to lose it completely, she heard a sound, a soft thud from upstairs. She froze, her breath catching in her chest. What the hell is going on? With trembling hands, she made her way up the stairs again, each step creaking louder than the last. As she approached the hallway, she saw something out of the corner of her eye, a shadow, dark and shifting, moving in and out of the room at the end of the hall. Her blood ran cold. She slowly moved forward, her pulse pounding in her ears. There was no way Jack would be in there. He couldn't be. But the shadow moved again, closer this time. And then, "Jack!" she screamed, her voice shaking with terror. The shadow vanished, leaving nothing but the silence of the hallway. The house was no longer just old. It was haunted. Emma had never believed in ghosts. She didn't trust superstitions, had always been practical. But something about this place was different. The air, thick with whispers, weighed on her. The creaking of the floorboards felt intentional, like footsteps echoing in the dark, though no one was ever there. Every time she thought she had adjusted to the strange quiet, something would happen to send her heart racing again. Jack had been gone for hours. After Emma's frantic search the night before, he returned just as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, looking pale, disheveled, and confused. He had no memory of where he'd been or how he'd gotten there. He couldn't even remember leaving the house. He seemed genuinely distressed, but also strangely detached, as if something wasn't quite right with him either. Still, they hadn't spoken much about it. The conversation had drifted back to normal topics, as if nothing had happened. And yet, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in him. Something subtle. Something she couldn't yet name. By noon, the silence had thickened again. Jack was outside, fixing the fence that had been damaged in the last storm, and Emma found herself alone in the house once more. She went into the living room and sank into the same old couch where she'd spent the previous evening. Her eyes fell on the cracked walls, the peeling paint that made the room feel like it was decaying from the inside out. But it wasn't just a house. It was a land. The ground beneath her feet seemed to hum with an energy she couldn't explain. She stood up and walked over the window, pulling back the tattered curtain. The trees in the distance swayed, but there was no breeze. Not a single leaf rustled. It was as if the entire forest held its breath, waiting. And then there it was. At first, Emma thought it was a trick of the light, just a shadow, a distortion in the way the trees bent. But as she stared harder, her stomach twisted into knots. A figure stood at the edge of the woods, unmoving, its face obscured by a hood or a tangle of hair. But the figure was tall, unnaturally tall. Its limbs seemed to stretch out of proportion, angular, almost skeletal. And it wasn't human. Emma's breath caught in her throat, her pulse quickening. She squinted through the glass, but the figure remained motionless. She didn't know how long she stood there, staring at the figure that didn't move. Finally, in a rush of panic, she pulled back from the window, her heart hammering in her chest. Her legs felt weak as she stumbled backward, her breath coming in shallow gasps. It was real. It was real. "Emma?" Jack's voice echoed from the doorway, and she turned, startled, her heart leaping in her throat. He stood there, looking a bit more composed than before, wiping his hands on a rag. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern clouding his expression. I saw something," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. She didn't know how to explain what she had seen. The terror, the feeling that something was watching her from beyond the window. Jack frowned, walking toward her. "Saw what? What are you talking about?" "There was someone or something standing out in the trees, in the woods. It wasn't human. It was too tall, too thin. Its arms. She couldn't bring herself to finish the description. It sounded insane, even to her own ears. But the image was burned into her mind. She could still see it, standing there unmoving. Jack raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Emma, it's just the trees playing tricks on you. You're tired. You didn't sleep much last night." "I know what I saw," she said, her voice shaking. But Jack just stared at her, and then sighed, clearly unwilling to entertain her fears any longer. "Look, we're out here in the middle of nowhere. It's probably an animal, or maybe someone from the town. There's nothing to worry about." But Emma wasn't convinced. There had been something wrong with the figure. The way it had stood still, like it wasn't just watching her, but waiting for something, as if it had been there for a long time. Underscore, 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 underscore. That night, Emma lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the howling wind. The house groaned as if it were alive, the wood shifting and creaking with the weight of the storm. Jack had fallen asleep beside her, his breathing slow and even, but Emma couldn't find the same peace. Her mind raced, replaying the moment in the window over and over again. She closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep, but her body refused to cooperate. A soft thud echoed from the hallway. Emma's eyes snapped open. She held her breath, listening intently. The house was so quiet that the sound of her own heartbeat seemed loud in her ears. Another thud, this one closer. Her chest tightened. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the house settling. Someone, or something, was walking the hallway. Her heart pounded as she slowly sat up, holding the blankets close to her chest. Jack didn't stir beside her. He slept through it all, unaware of the dark presence creeping through their home. The thuds came again, a slow, methodical pace, like footsteps echoing through the house. Emma's skin crawled. She didn't know what to do. Should she wake Jack? Should she call out? But what if the figure from the woods was back? Or worse, what if it had come inside? With trembling hands, Emma reached for her phone on the bedside table, her fingers numb as she dialed Jack's number, hoping the sound would break the silence. The phone rang, then went to voicemail. She couldn't wait any longer. Grabbing her jacket, she slid out of bed, careful not to wake Jack. The floor felt colder than usual, the air heavier. Her steps were soundless as she crept toward the door, her pulse racing. The house was suffocating in its silence, and the thudding sounds had stopped. But she could feel something out there, something watching. She reached the doorway and paused. The hallway was dark, the shadows deepening with every passing second. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves, and then stepped out into the darkness. The house seemed to close in around her. The walls seemed to shift, to move closer, as if the house itself were alive. She reached the top of the stairs, her eyes scanning the hallway for any sign of movement, and then she saw it, a shadow at the end of the hall, tall and dark. It stretched, like it was growing out of the walls, like it was coming for her. Emma froze. The shadow began to move, slowly at first, as if it were pulling itself toward her, inch by inch. Her breath hitched, and she wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. She was paralyzed, locked in place by the dark, twisting shape. Suddenly, a soft voice whispered from behind her, "Don't be afraid." Emma stood frozen at the top of the stairs, her heart hammering in her chest, her breath shallow. The shadow at the end of the hall moved closer, its shape stretching, warping in unnatural ways. It was tall, far too tall, and its form bent at angles that no human body should be able to achieve. The darkness clung to it like a second skin, as though it were made from the very shadows that filled the house. "Don't be afraid." The voice was a whisper, low and soft, but clear. It came from behind her, as though it had been spoken right into her ear. Emma spun around, her body trembling with fear, but the hallway was empty. Jack's voice hadn't woken up yet. He was still sleeping in their bedroom, oblivious to everything. Who said that? The question echoed in her mind, but before she could take another step, the shadow at the end of the hallway lurched forward with an unnatural speed. It didn't walk, it glided, sliding across the floor like oil, fluid and disturbingly quiet. Her eyes locked onto its twisted, shifting shape as it came closer. She could feel its presence pressing in on her, wrapping itself around her like a suffocating cloud. "Jack!" Emma screamed, her voice breaking. "Jack!" But no sound came from the bedroom behind her. The house seemed to swallow her cries, and the darkness in the hall grew deeper with every passing second. The shadow was inches away now, and Emma could feel its cold, suffocating aura, the weight of it pressing against her chest. Her hands shook violently, but her feet wouldn't move. She was trapped in place, paralyzed by fear. "Look at me!" The whisper came again, sharp now, demanding. The words were coming from the shadow itself. They felt like they were inside her head, crawling under her skin. She couldn't look away. Her eyes were drawn to the shifting mass, to the strange angles and terrifying, inhuman movements. The shadow's form seemed to melt and reassemble, as if it didn't have a defined shape, just a void that swallowed everything it touched. Her pulse raced as she took a slow step backward. The shadow didn't follow, not immediately, but it was there, always just beyond her reach, always watching. She knew, deep down, that it wouldn't stop until it had her. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from downstairs. The sound shattered the thick silence of the house like a thunderclap, and Emma jerked her head toward the source of the noise. The shadow paused. The darkness in the hall seemed to twitch, to hesitate, as though distracted. With a gasp, Emma broke free from her frozen state and bolted down the stairs, her feet flying across the old wood with frantic urgency. Her pulse pounded in her ears, drowning out everything but the sound of her own breath. Downstairs, the kitchen was lit by the faint glow of the dying fire from the hearth. The room was otherwise still. Everything appeared normal, the way she had left it when they finished dinner. But then her eyes landed on the floor. A glass jar lay shattered in the center of the room, its contents, a small collection of antique silver spoons, scattered in every direction. The jar had been placed on the kitchen counter just a few hours ago. Emma was sure of it. The shards of glass glinted in the firelight, their edges sharp and jagged. But the strangest thing was the way the spoons were arranged. They weren't just scattered randomly. No, they had been placed with precision, each one pointing toward a single spot on the floor, like a circle of eyes staring back at her. Her breath caught in her throat as she slowly crouched down to get a closer look. The spoons seemed to form a pattern, their handles pointing inward, creating a kind of ritualistic shape. A chill ran through her as she stood, her heart pounding harder than ever. She couldn't make sense of it. Why would the spoons be arranged like this? And who had moved them? The answer came in a whisper from the darkness at the back of the room. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was deep, guttural, and distinctly not Jack's. It was rough, like something dragged its words through broken stone. Emma spun around, her breath catching in her throat, but the room was still empty. She stumbled backward, the blood draining from her face. Her legs were weak, and she felt as though the walls were closing in on her. The air was thick, heavy with the same oppressive pressure she felt earlier in the hallway, as if someone were inside the house now, breathing with her. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift, the wooden floorboards groaning like they were stretching. She reached out to steady herself, but her hand found nothing solid. The floor was undulating beneath her, the beams beneath the house warping, twisting. "Jack, please," she shouted, her voice hoarse. There was no response. In a panic, she turned to run back up the stairs, but before she could reach the bottom of the staircase, something caught her ankle. She screamed as she felt a cold, invisible force pull her backward. Her fingers dug into the railing, but it wasn't enough to stop her from being dragged across the floor. She kicked and thrashed, but the pull only grew stronger, dragging her toward the center of the room, toward the circle of spoons. And then, as if in a dream, the floor beneath her seemed to open up. Cracks spread to the wooden planks, and the ground opened wide like a mouth ready to devour her. Emma felt a rush of air, cold, foul, the stench of rot, before the darkness swallowed her whole. She screamed, but it was too late. The floor gave way beneath her, and she fell. Emma's eyes snapped open, gasping for breath. She was back in the bed, the sheets tangled around her body, her heart pounding violently in her chest. The room was dimly lit by the faint light of dawn creeping through the window. She was covered in sweat, her body drenched in a cold, sticky film. The faint memory of the fall, the crack of the floor splitting open beneath her, lingered like a phantom pain. It was just a dream, just a nightmare. She took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. She turned to the side, expecting to see Jack beside her, still asleep, but he wasn't there. Her stomach twisted into knots. "Where is he?" Emma sat up quickly, glancing around the room. The house was unnervingly quiet, the oppressive stillness hanging thick in the air. She listened closely for any sound, any sign of life, but there was nothing. "Jack," she called softly, her voice weak. No answer. Frantic, she rushed out of the room, through the hallway, and down the stairs. But the house was still empty. The kitchen was untouched. The front door was locked as she had left it. And then, from upstairs, she heard it, a door opening, the slow, creaking sound of it shifting, and then soft footsteps, faint, almost imperceptible. "Jack!" Emma whispered, her voice trembling, but the footsteps didn't stop. The footsteps grew louder. Emma's heart hammered in her chest as she stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs. Each step that creaked above her seemed to vibrate through her bones. She held her breath, her eyes darting around the empty room, her mind racing. Was Jack playing some twisted game with her? Had she imagined everything? No, she couldn't have. The spoons, the whispers, the shadows, it had all been too real. The footsteps weren't Jack's. She could tell. She stood still, listening intently. The sound was slow, deliberate, too slow for Jack's usual hurried pace. And then, just as suddenly as they had begun, the steps stopped. Silence pressed down around her like a heavy weight. The quiet was suffocating. "Jack?" she called again, her voice small and fragile, barely a whisper. No answer. She couldn't wait any longer. With shaking legs, Emma started toward the stairs, her feet barely making a sound on the creaky wooden floor. She moved up cautiously, each step an effort, her pulse racing, her mind screaming for her to turn back. But something inside her told her that the answers she needed were at the top of those stairs. The hallway stretched out before her, the dim light from the window casting long shadows on the floor. The door to the bedroom was open, the bed still undisturbed. The room felt wrong. There was an energy here, an oppressive weight that made the air feel thicker, like it was pressing against her chest. Emma took a deep breath and stepped inside, but there was no sign of Jack. The room was just as she had left it. The blanket was half draped over the bed, the lamp still casting a soft, orange glow on the nightstand. Everything seemed perfectly normal, except for the chill in the air. Her eyes scanned the room, but her attention was drawn to something on the floor. A small, blackened stain near the corner of the room caught her eye. It looked like a burn mark, but different. It wasn't just a simple scorch. The edges of the mark seemed to crawl, almost like the stain was alive. Her heart skipped a beat as she took a hesitant step closer. It wasn't just a stain. It was a symbol, a pattern, intricate and twisted, scratched into the wood. A crude spiral surrounded by jagged lines, like a distorted sigil that seemed to twist and writhe when she looked at it too long. It wasn't something she'd seen before. It was ancient, unsettling, and clearly deliberate. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just some random damage. This had been made on purpose. "Jack," she whispered again, her voice cracking, but there was still no answer. Her mind raced. Had Jack done this? She couldn't imagine it. He had been so rational, so grounded before they came here. He was always the level-headed one. But something had changed in him. Something had shifted the moment they stepped foot inside this house. Had the place done this to him? Or had he already been a part of it? Just then, a faint sound broke her concentration. A low, distant hum, like a whisper too quiet to catch. It didn't come from the walls or the air. It came from beneath the floor. The same place she had noticed the strange vibrations earlier that morning. A thud, followed by a scraping sound. It was coming from floorboards. Emma dropped to her knees, heart pounding in her chest as she pressed her ear to the ground. The humming grew louder, more distinct, and now she could hear what sounded like something being dragged, pulled, underneath the house. A scraping noise that sent chills down her spine. It was like something was trying to break free. What the hell is happening here? Her hand trembled as she slid her fingers along the edge of the floorboard, feeling the roughness of the wood beneath her skin. Without thinking, she pried up the edge of the floor, digging her nails into the cracks between the boards. The scraping sound intensified, and Emma's heart rate picked up. She gasped as the board loosened, revealing a dark, narrow gap. The smell hit her first, a thick, sour stench that was both metallic and rotten. It made her stomach churn, and she almost gagged as she leaned in closer, peering into the darkness beneath the floor. There was something there. She didn't want to look, but she couldn't stop herself. Her eyes adjusted to dimness, and she saw it, piles of bones, stacked in odd, unnatural heaps, like some twisted ritual had taken place. Old, brittle bones, some cracked, some still intact, but all yellow with age. There was a jumble of other things too, rags, scraps of fabric, and what appeared to be small trinkets, old buttons, rusted nails, and what looked like shattered mirrors scattered carelessly among the bones. The hum grew louder, vibrating to the very bones beneath her fingers. She recoiled, her breath coming fast and shallow as her stomach turned over in disgust. But something made her look again. Something compelled her to. And there, near the center of the pile, was a small, black box. It wasn't big, just small enough to fit in the palm of her hand. The box looked out of place, clean and unblemished, resting on top of the bones. There was no dust, no grime, just a small, unmarked box that seemed to beckon her. Without thinking, her hand shot out, reaching for it. The moment her fingers touched the box, the ground trembled beneath her. The humming intensified, pulsing through her body like it was inside her very veins. Her skin crawled as an overwhelming sense of dread washed over her. She yanked her hand away, gasping for air. The box remained where it was, untouched, but she could feel the presence of something old and angry, lingering just beneath the floor. And then, before she could react, she heard it again. The whisper, "You should have left." It was closer this time, as if it had moved right behind her. Her breath caught in her throat, and she spun around, but no one was there. She scrambled to her feet, panic overtaking her. The room seemed to shift around her, the shadows stretching unnaturally long. The air grew heavy again, pressing down on her, suffocating her. She wanted to scream, to run, but the words caught in her throat. "You shouldn't have come." The whisper came again, louder this time, and Emma's world spun out of control. She turned toward the door, but before she could reach it, the floor beneath her feet buckled with a violent jolt. The lights flickered. A sudden, piercing shriek echoed through the house, and then the walls closed in. Emma stood frozen, the shrill cries still echoing through the house, rattling the walls. Her heart pounded in her chest, and every inch of her body screamed at her to run, but her legs were locked in place, frozen in terror. The whispering voice still lingered in her ears, its presence so overwhelming it felt like it was pulling her under. "You shouldn't have come." The words repeated like a broken record, over and over again, until they were no longer a sound, but feeling, a dark weight pressing against her mind. Her vision blurred as if the very air around her had thickened, and she stumbled backward, her fingers brushing the floor as though seeking support that wasn't there. She had to leave. She had to leave. But she couldn't move. It was as if the house had sunk its claws into her, holding her in place. The shriek faded, replaced by a low, rumbling hum, the sound coming from beneath her feet. The floor trembled, though it groaning under some unseen weight. Her skin prickled as if she were being watched, and the oppressive feeling of dread pushed her back toward the center of the room. She fought to breathe, trying to gather herself. She reached for the door, but it was no use. The air had become too thick, the shadows too deep. The house itself felt alive, and the darkness around her had grown tangible, like it was wrapping around her, squeezing the life out of her. With a sudden, violent jolt, Emma snapped back to reality. Her vision cleared, and she realized she was back at the foot of the stairs again. The hallway stretched out in front of her, the air normal, no oppressive hum, no whispers, just silence. But the silence was more terrifying than any noise. She gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Had it all been a hallucination? Was she losing her mind? No, no. She couldn't afford to think like that. She had seen the bones, the sigil in the room. She had felt the pull beneath the floor. This place was wrong. The house was wrong. Her fingers shook as she touched the wall, grounding herself. But even the texture of the old plaster felt off, unreal, like she wasn't really touching anything at all. She drew in a shaky breath and took a step forward, her pulse racing. Her mind reeled from the strange shift in reality. But she had to keep moving. She wouldn't let it defeat her. Then, as though on cue, the floorboards creaked again. This time, the sound came from upstairs, the unmistakable weight of footsteps. Her blood ran cold. "Jack," without thinking, Emma started toward the stairs again, climbing the steps slowly, cautiously. She couldn't afford to be paranoid, not again, but the house was giving her no choice. The walls seemed to narrow, the steps growing steeper, harder to climb, as though it was testing her resolve. She felt a familiar chill brush against her neck, as though someone or something was right behind her. By the time she reached the top, the sounds had stopped. The silence now felt even more unnatural. Emma's breath came in shallow gasps as she moved down the hallway toward the bedroom. The door was cracked open, and she hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the knob. Something wasn't right. Her body screamed for her to turn back, but her feet betrayed her. She pushed the door open, and the first thing she noticed was that the bed was perfectly made, neatly tucked in, the pillow fluffed, as if no one had slept in it for days. The room was empty, not a single thing out of place. But it didn't feel empty. It felt wrong. The air was thick with something she couldn't name, something that made her skin crawl. She turned around, expected to see Jack behind her, but the hallway was completely still. The faint smell of something decaying lingered in the air, and for a split second, she thought she saw a dark figure moving in the corner of the room, a shadow that flickered and vanished the moment she blinked. She shook her head, her mind spinning. No, not again. But then, from the corner of her eye, something caught her attention. The small black box she had seen earlier, the one hidden beneath the floorboards, was sitting on the nightstand. Her stomach churned. It was impossible. She had not moved it. She had barely touched it. Yet here it was, sitting innocently on the table, as if it had always belonged there. Her hand shook as she reached for it, her fingers brushing the cold metal. A shock ran through her, a jolt of static that made her withdraw her hand quickly. She looked at the box, her breath shallow. What was inside? The urge to open it was overwhelming. It was as if the box was calling to her, urging her to unlock whatever was hidden within. She turned the small latch. The box creaked open with a soft, echoing sound, revealing a piece of blackened cloth inside. At first, Emma thought it was just a rag, something mundane. But as she pulled it out, the fabric unfolded into a shape that made her blood run cold. It was a mask made of bone, crudely carved, with empty eye sockets and a twisted, grotesque grin etched into its surface. It felt wrong to touch it, but she couldn't stop herself. Her fingers traced a smooth, polished surface, but with every touch, the room seemed to grow darker, the shadows lengthening, crawling toward her. The whispers returned, louder now. You shouldn't have come. The air grew suffocating, the pressure unbearable. Emma felt herself stumbling backward, away from the table. But she couldn't tear her eyes away from the mask. It felt like it was alive, as though it had a mind of its own, as though it had been waiting for her. The door slammed shut behind her, the sound deafening. Her heart skipped a beat. She whipped around, but there was nothing behind her. No figure, no Jack, and yet she could feel it. Something was in the room with her. The mask began to move, slowly at first, but then faster, the empty eye sockets darkening, as if they were being filled with something. The grin stretched wider, the bones seeming to crack and shift, as if they were breaking free from their constraints. She stumbled back toward the door, her hand grasping at the handle. It wouldn't budge. The whispers were getting louder. She spun around, frantic. There, at the edge of the bed, standing in the dark corner, was a figure, tall, thin, the same figure she had seen in the woods. Its body bent at unnatural angles, its limbs stretching in ways that made her dizzy. It was watching her, waiting. You shouldn't have come. Emma's mind broke. The words echoed in her head, mixing with the shrieks, the whispers, the growls that were rising from beneath the floorboards. The shadows pressing on her, suffocating her in a sea of black. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The house had her. The air in the room was suffocating, the walls closing in around her. The whispering grew louder, sharper, until it felt as though the sound was coming from inside her skull. Her body trembled, cold sweat beating on her skin, her breath shallow and erratic. The shadows in the corner of the room. The figure moved, its limbs stretching and twisting in grotesque angles, like it wasn't bound by the rules of the living. Emma's heart thudded in her chest as she backed away, her fingers digging into the doorframe, desperately trying to get out. But the door wouldn't open. The handle twisted uselessly in her hand. It was as if the house itself had locked her in, as if it had decided that she was not allowed to leave. The whispers were all around her now, voices that seemed to echo from every direction. She couldn't make out the words anymore. They were too many, too distorted. all blending together in a maddening cacophony of sound. The figure, the thing in the corner, shifted again, and Emma's eyes locked onto its dark form. She could see it now more clearly, the way it hunched and twisted, its long limbs scraping the floor. Its face was the worst part. It had no eyes, just two hollow sockets filled with a darkness so deep it seemed to suck in the light from the room. A gaping, jagged smile stretched across its face, too wide for any human to bear. "No," Emma whispered, her voice shaking. Her breath hitched in her throat, and panic clawed at her chest. She wanted to run, to scream, to do anything, but her body refused to move. She was frozen, rooted to the spot by the overwhelming presence of the creature. And then, with slow, deliberate movements, it tilted its head toward her. "Come closer," it said, its voice like dry leaves scraping against each other in the wind. "I've been waiting for you." The words were laced with a sickening sweetness, like a promise or a threat. Emma tried to scream, but nothing came out. Her throat was tight, her mouth dry. She could feel the tears welling up in her eyes, the sheer terror threatening to consume her. This was it. The thing in front of her, whatever it was no longer human. It wasn't even from this world. The room seemed to warp around her, and for a moment, she thought she might collapse under the weight of it all. The shadows were crawling up the walls now, slithering like snakes, consuming every inch of light in the room. The mask on the floor, the bone mask, sat on the nightstand, its eyes now following her. Something inside her snapped. The house, the figure, the whispers, they were all too much. With a frantic movement, Emma lunged toward the nightstand, grabbing the mask. She didn't know why she did it, didn't know what compelled her to touch it again, but she knew that she had no other choice. As soon as her fingers brushed against the cold surface, the house seemed to shift. The floor shook violently, the walls groaning as if they were alive. "You're too late," the figure rasped, its voice filling her ears, flooding her mind. "You're already ours." The mask began to vibrate in her hands, the rattling growing louder with each passing second. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, her vision blurring. The room began to spin, the walls folding in on themselves, stretching and bending in unnatural ways. The hum of the house grew deafening, filling her mind with a sense of crushing weight, of inevitability. She screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the noise. Her hands were shaking violently as she pressed a mask to her face, unwillingly, uncontrollably. And then the world collapsed. Darkness. There was no light, no sound, only an endless void. Emma felt her body falling, though she didn't know in which direction. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Disorienting, suffocating, as if she was being pulled in 1,000 different directions at once. "Where am I?" The thought barely formed before a cold, slick hand grasped her wrist. She flinched, instinctively pulling away, but the grip tightened, cold and unyielding. "You cannot escape," a voice hissed in her ear. It wasn't the figure from the corner, but something deeper, something older, something far more ancient. The voice was a part of the darkness itself. Emma's heart raced, her body trembling. She tried to scream again, but no sound escaped her lips. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. It was as if her very existence was being smothered by the void. Her head spun, her vision warping as shapes began to emerge from the darkness. Shapes that shouldn't have existed. They were like fragments of forgotten memories, half-formed, twisted, their edges jagged and broken. Faces, eyes, hands. They watched her. "You were always meant to be here," the voice whispered again, and this time Emma felt it felt the weight of the words in her bones. The house knows you, knows your blood. My blood? A sickening realization flooded her mind. She hadn't just stumbled into this place by accident. She hadn't been drawn here out of curiosity or coincidence. She was tied to this house, linked to it in ways she couldn't understand. The presence of the figure in the corner, the voices, the shadows, they had been calling to her from the moment she arrived. They weren't just haunting her, they were waiting for her. The truth was worse than she could have imagined. You can't leave, the voice continued, now rising in pitch. You were born for this. You were always meant to walk these halls. Suddenly, the darkness around her seemed to shatter, like glass breaking. The pieces fell away, revealing something far worse than the void, the house itself. She was back in the bedroom, but it was no longer the room she had once known. The walls were cracked, the floor covered in grime and old bloodstains. The air was thick with decay, and the smell of death hung heavy in the atmosphere. The bones beneath the floorboards were now visible, their hollow eyes staring back at her. She wasn't alone anymore. The room was filled with people. No, not people. Things, creatures with hollow eyes, twisted faces, their bodies rotting, half melted into the walls. They were crawling toward her, their outstretched hands reaching for her. You are one of us, they whispered in unison. You always were. Emma's body was paralyzed, her mind shattering beneath the weight of their words. This house, it wasn't just a place. It was a prison. It was a gateway, a place where the living and the dead could meet. And she was caught between both worlds. The darkness pressed in on Emma from all sides, suffocating her, consuming her. She stood in the ruined bedroom, the shadows stretching and curling around her, pulling at her legs as if the very walls were trying to drag her down. The figures, the things, moved slowly, their hollow eyes fixed on her, their decaying hands reaching out, begging for something Emma couldn't understand. No! She gasped, backing up until her legs hit the bed. Her heart pounded painfully in her chest, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Her body was frozen, her mind struggling to comprehend the horrors unfolding before her. The creatures, if they could even be called that, closed in. Their eyes were black as coal, filled with a malice so deep it made her insides twist. They weren't alive. They were dead, but somehow still here, in this place, a place that felt like the boundary between the living world and the world of the damned. You were always meant to walk these halls, one of them whispered, its voice like the screeching of nails on a chalkboard. Its face was almost human, but the skin hung from the bones, gray and lifeless. It reached a clawed hand toward her, and Emma instinctively pulled away. "Leave me alone!" she shouted, her voice breaking in the crushing silence. She felt the weight of her words, and yet the creatures didn't flinch. They kept coming, their dead eyes glimmering with an eerie, knowing light. It was then that she realized she was no longer alone in her mind. The whispers had become more than just sounds. They had become a presence, filling every corner of her consciousness. They were inside her, gnawing at her thoughts, reshaping them. "You can't run from what you are," they said, their voices now echoing from every direction. It was as if the house itself had spoken, not through the walls, but through her mind. Her very soul was becoming a part of it. Emma closed her eyes, trying to block out the voices. She had to find a way out. She had to. The mask in her hand, the bone mask, was still warm, its surface vibrating with an unsettling energy. She clenched her fingers around it, and a surge of power coursed through her veins, making her head spin. "You were chosen." The voice continued, the one that was inside her. "You've always been part of this place. This house. This legacy." "Legacy?" she croaked, her throat dry, the words scraping painfully from her chest. She felt something, an urge, welling up from the depths of her being. It wasn't a thought, but a memory. A faint image of a woman, no, someone, standing in a darkened hallway, holding a child's hand. The memory wasn't her own, but it felt so familiar. It was her. The house groaned, its creaking sound suddenly louder, almost as if it were responding to her realization. Her hand shook violently as she dropped the mask, its strange energy still thrumming through her, though now it was less overpowering. She took a step back, her mind racing, the vision of the woman and child more vivid than ever. Why did she know this? Why did it feel like she'd seen it before? The air grew colder. Suddenly, the floor beneath her feet shifted. The walls, once so firm, began to crack. The figures in the room stilled, their black eyes focused on her. The silence was so thick, it was suffocating. And then, the shadows from the walls surged forward, gathering at the foot of the bed. From the darkness, the figure that had first haunted her, the one she had seen in the corner of the room, emerged. It was different now. Its body was no longer distorted, no longer shifting. It stood tall and still, a towering figure of pure malice. Its face was pale with smooth, flawless skin. A twisted grin stretched across its lips, but its eyes were the same, hollow, empty, and void of any emotion. "You are my descendant," it said in a voice that was strangely calm, too calm. "You are the one I have waited for." Emma's blood ran cold. "What?" she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean?" The figure's smile deepened, its face twisting into something more monstrous with every passing second. "The mask," it continued, its voice dripping with dark satisfaction. "It was passed down to you. Your bloodline has always been tied to this house. To me." Emma stumbled back, her head spinning. She didn't understand. Her parents, her family. She had no connection to this place. She had just moved into the house with Jack. This was all just a coincidence. But the figure's words pierced through her doubts. This house has always chosen its heir. And you, Emma, are the next. The next. Her heart lurched. Heir to what? You're... Emma's voice cracked as her mind began to unravel the horrifying truth. "You're my ancestor?" The figure didn't answer directly. Instead, it reached out a long, gnarled hand, brushing the air between them. "I am the one who binds this house. I am the first, the one who created this place, and I have waited for my blood to return. The mask is yours, and now the house calls you home." Emma's vision blurred, and the world seemed to fold in on itself once more. Her thoughts were becoming fragmented, scattered like pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit. The weight of the figure's words pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. "No," she gasped, her fingers trembling at her sides. "No, I can't. I won't be part of this." The figure tilted its head, studying her like a curious creature. "It's already too late. You've been marked. You are bound to this house, just as your bloodline was before you. You can't run from who you are. You can't escape." The whispers around her grew louder. The walls shuddered, vibrating with energy she couldn't comprehend. The shadows of the room twisted, growing thicker, and she could hear the sound of distant voices. No, screams, coming from deep within the house. The figure reached out again, this time placing its hand on her shoulder. The cold seeped into her skin, numbing her, paralyzing her. "You will join us," it whispered, its lips curling into a grotesque smile. Suddenly, everything shifted again. The house around her seemed to warp, the walls bulging, the floor tilting, until Emma was standing in a new place entirely. It was familiar, a hallway, a long, dark hallway lined with faded portraits of people she didn't recognize. The air was thick with dust, and the dim light from the flickering sconces barely illuminated the space. This wasn't the bedroom anymore. This was something else. Something from the past. And then she saw it. At the end of the hallway stood a woman who looked exactly like her. Her twin. "You are home," the woman whispered, her eyes dark and knowing. Emma gasped, her mind unraveling as the truth dawned on her. She was no longer in the present. The house had pulled her into a memory, into a time long before her own life had even begun. The woman smiled, her lips curving with a dark promise. "Welcome to your inheritance, Emma." Emma's heart thundered in her chest, the frantic beats echoing in her ears as the hallway stretched before her. The woman, the figure who looked so much like her, stood at the far end, her face a mirror image of Emma's, but with something hollow behind her eyes. The air was thick with a sense of inevitability, a suffocating pressure that weighed heavily on Emma's every breath. "You are the key," the woman's voice whispered, and for the first time, it wasn't just an echo of the house's whispers. It was real, clear, direct. Everything has been leading to this moment. Your bloodline, your existence. It all comes back to the house. Emma stepped backward, shaking her head violently. She couldn't be hearing this. It was impossible. This woman, this doppelganger, wasn't her. It couldn't be. But when Emma looked down at her own hands, they were trembling with the same fear that had consumed her since the moment she entered this place. She knew, deep down, she understood that this woman was not some stranger. This woman was her, or at least the part of her that had been lost to time, the part of her family that had been sacrificed. "No," Emma whispered hoarsely, her voice barely a breath. "No, this isn't real. This is just a nightmare." The woman's lips curled into a smile, the expression warm yet empty, like something long dead. "A nightmare? No, Emma. This is your reality now. This is the truth, and you've been running from it for far too long. Your blood has always called to this house. Always. You are its heir. You belong here. Asterisk." Emma's vision blurred as tears welled in her eyes. She staggered back, her mind screaming for a way out. She had tried to escape the house's grip, tried to run, tried to deny it all. But now, standing face to face with her reflection, she knew that the truth was worse than any nightmare. The house knew her. It had always known her. Every room, every shadow, every whispered voice. It had been leading her here. The woman, her twin, was not just a ghost. She was a part of Emma's very being, a manifestation of the darkness that ran through her veins. "Why are you showing me this?" Emma choked out. "Why now?" The woman's expression softened, a trace of pity flickering in her eyes. "Because you cannot hide from it. The house won't let you. It never has." The words hit Emma like a punch to the gut. Her bloodline had always been tied to the house. Her ancestors had been a part of it, bound to it in ways that were both physical and spiritual. The house was not just a place. It was a living, breathing entity, and Emma was its heir, whether she wanted it or not. "You can't run anymore, Emma," the woman said, her voice gentle, yet laced with chilling finality. "It's time for you to claim your place. It's time to end the cycle." Emma's breath caught in her throat as the reality of the situation began to set in. The house, the haunting, the whispers, the shadows. It had all been leading to this moment. She was the key to the house's power. She was the one who could either break the curse or become a permanent part of its terrifying legacy. "What do I have to do?" Emma's voice was barely above a whisper, her hands shaking as they balled into fists. The weight of the decision pressed down on her, suffocating her, and she knew that whatever choice she made, it would cost her everything. The woman's smile faded, replaced by an expression that was both sorrowful and knowing. "You must choose," she said. "You must choose to either free this house from its curse or embrace it, becoming one with it forever." Emma's pulse quickened, Her thoughts spun, her heart aching with the weight of the decision. She had seen what had happened to those who had lived in this house before her. The twisted figures, the broken souls, the agonizing wails that echoed through the walls. The choice before her was clear, but it was more terrifying than anything she had ever imagined. To free the house would mean breaking the cycle, destroying the link between the living and the dead, severing the connection that had bound her family to this place for generations. But that would come with a cost. The price of breaking the curse would be the ultimate sacrifice. Emma could feel it. She could feel the pull of the house, its dark power thrumming beneath her skin. To embrace it, to become part of the house, would mean giving up her humanity, her identity, her very soul. She would become a permanent fixture in the house, a part of an eternal horror. But what if she could never escape it? What if the house was the only place she truly belonged? Choose, the woman urged softly, as though Emma hadn't already known the answer. Do not fear the darkness, for it is the only path to peace, to freedom, to eternal rest. Emma took a deep breath, her chest aching with the weight of her decision. Her mind raced with the memories of the past few days, her terror, her confusion, the way she had tried so hard to leave this place, only to be pulled deeper into it. She had fought it, but she knew now that fighting it was futile. The house was alive. It had always been alive, and it had been waiting for her. With a shuddering breath, Emma stepped forward, the floorboards creaking underfoot. The woman's form flickered, becoming more translucent with each step she took. As Emma reached her, the woman's smile returned, though it was sadder now, as if she, too, knew the price Emma would have to pay. I choose to break the curse, Emma whispered, her voice firm despite the fear that gripped her. The woman's eyes widened, and for a brief moment, Emma thought she saw a flicker of pride in them. Then you must do it yourself, the woman said softly. You must sever the bloodline. You must destroy what binds us to this house. Emma's heart lurched, and she felt the ground beneath her feet shift. The shadows in the hallways swirled, pulling away from her as if the house itself were recoiling from her decision. It was now or never. Emma closed her eyes and raised her hands, reaching into the air, gathering the power of the house, willing herself to tear the curse apart. But as she did, the house groaned. The walls shook violently, and the temperature plummeted. The figure, the twisted, dark being that had haunted her, appeared in front of her, its hollow eyes glaring at her. You cannot break the curse, it hissed. You are part of it now. And with those words, the darkness closed in. Emma could feel her power slipping away, her body trembling with exhaustion. She was caught between two worlds, and the house was determined not to let her go. The walls of the house groaned with an unnatural force, as though they were alive and thrashing in agony. The very air around Emma seemed to pulse with malignant energy, thick and suffocating. The temperature plummeted further, until her breath crystallized in the cold. She could feel the house fighting back against her, its ancient, cursed power trying to pull her under. Emma stood at the center of the long hallway. The dark figure, the first of her ancestors, the one who had twisted the house into this nightmare, looming before her. Its hollow eyes burned into her, its twisted smile wide and cruel. You cannot escape what you are, it said, its voice deep and venomous, reverberating through the house. You belong to us. You always have. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, her limbs trembling with exhaustion. She had fought so hard to escape, to sever the curse that had bound her bloodline to this house. But she could feel the weight of the decision closing in around her. The house was more than a structure. It was a living thing, a parasitic entity that had consumed her ancestors, and now it wanted her, too. She swallowed hard, her hands still shaking as she clutched the bone mask that had been her inheritance. Its warmth had faded, but its presence still pulsed with dark energy, a tether to the house that she couldn't escape. But she had to. She had no choice. The shadows in the room began to swirl, coalescing into shapes that were almost human but twisted, unnatural. The figures of her ancestors, dead and long forgotten, appeared before her, their eyes empty and accusing. They were the lost souls of the house, the ones who had fallen victim to its curse. They circled her like vultures, their whispers filled with despair and rage. "You cannot break the curse," one of them hissed. "You are one of us, one with the house." "No!" Emma cried out, her voice breaking as she stepped backward. "I won't be part of this. I will not be a prisoner like you." But even as she said the words, she could feel the house tightening around her. It was a physical thing now, its grip on her soul growing stronger, colder. Her skin crawled, and her heart beat faster, as if the house was feasting on her fear, on her doubt. "You don't understand," the figure whispered, its voice like the scraping of nails on stone. "This is who you are. This is your destiny. This is what your bloodline was born for." Emma shook her head violently, her fingers clutching the mask tighter. The weight of the choice pressed against her, suffocating her. But deep inside her, there was a spark of defiance, an ember of hope that refused to go out. "No," she whispered fiercely. "I will end this. I won't let it continue." She turned her back on the figure, her eyes focusing on the hallway in front of her, the door at the end that led out of this nightmare. But the door wasn't a door anymore. It was a gateway, a way for the house to drag her into its clutches for eternity. It was the only exit, but it wasn't freedom. It was the end. And Emma knew what she had to do. She raised her hand, feeling the power of the house, its twisted energy coursing through her veins. She could feel its pull, the desire to consume her, to bind her forever. But she resisted. She had to. She focused all her will into the mask, into the energy it had given her. She had to destroy the house from the inside, sever the bloodline's connection once and for all. "You are part of me now," the dark figure hissed. "You cannot fight it. You belong here just as we do." "No," Emma whispered again, her voice trembling but determined. "I am not you. I am not this house." With a final, desperate surge of energy, Emma hurled the mask into the air. It spun, its dark power radiating outward, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The house itself seemed to groan, as if it were aware of the impending destruction. The walls trembled violently, the air thickening with a raw, painful energy. The mask shattered in midair, its bone fragments scattering like shards of glass. The dark power it contained burst outward in a blinding explosion, filling the hallway with an unbearable light. Emma shielded her eyes, her whole body shaking as the house around her fought to hold on to her, to pull her back into the darkness. But it was too late. A final, deafening crack echoed through the house. The walls cracked open like fragile stone, the ceiling splitting apart. The figures of her ancestors screamed in agony, their faces contorted in terror as the house began to break. The foundation of the house, the very heart of its malevolent power, began to crumble. Emma staggered backward, the force of the explosion pushing her off her feet. The darkness around her began to dissipate, the shadows receding as if they were never truly alive. The air grew warmer, the choking cold lifting from her skin. The house was collapsing. The curse was breaking. She felt the weight of the house's grip slip from her body, its suffocating hold fading into nothingness. The whispers, the shadows, the darkness, all was gone. She was free, but Emma's relief was short-lived. She turned to see the figure, her ancestor, standing before her, its face twisted in a final expression of fury. It lunged at her, its hands reaching for her throat. But Emma stood tall. She had made her choice. She would not be consumed. With one final, defiant scream, Emma raised her hand and unleashed the last of the house's power. the energy she had stolen from it. The figure howled in agony as the light engulfed it, its form disintegrating into ash. The house's final, tortured scream reverberated through walls, and then silence. For the first time in what felt like eternity, Emma stood alone in the hallway. The house was no more. The sun rose over the horizon, casting light on the remains of the house. The twisted, decaying structure had collapsed into a pile of rubble. There was no trace left of the darkness that had consumed it for so long. Emma stood on the outskirts of the ruins, her breath steady, her body sore, but free. She had destroyed the curse. She had broken the chain that had bound her family to this house for generations. She had won, and as she turned away, stepping into the sunlight, she knew that she had freed the souls of her ancestors, releasing them from the grip of the house forever. It was over. At last, Emma was free.